Mr. Chairman, distinguished delegates, as we meet here in Colombo today, the security and the territorial integrity of several sovereign states is being threatened and actually harmed by terrorism manifesting itself in the form of conventional warfare as well as various forms of terrorism. It is unfortunate that the intensity of such warfare and the success of terrorists is rising at an alarming rate. Territorial boundaries of nation states are being erased, and new and illegal formation of mono-religious and sectarian entities are emerging on the territories of defunct states. Thus, terrorism in all its forms and manifestations remains to be the foremost threat to the peace and security of the contemporary world order. Unless all of us unite and forge ahead relentlessly through strategized measures to eliminate terrorism and identify and address the root causes of terrorism, by the end of this century, a new world order will surely emerge. It will comprise of a totally different form of human civilization, and undemocratic regimes ruling the peoples of former sovereign states. Terrorist movements, ladies and gentlemen, of this era continue to engage in attempting to achieve their objectives through the unleashing of violence against governments, its security forces and the police, and more importantly, against innocent and unarmed civilians. Firearms, explosives, and even sophisticated weapons and equipment conventionally used by armed forces are used by terrorists to cause serious damage to life and property and to intimidate and threaten those in government as well as civilians. Since of late, they have focused their attention on using advanced technology, including in particular information and computer technology, as well as biotechnology, as means of achieving their criminal objectives. Ladies and gentlemen, computers, networking among computers, automated equipment, and other aspects of advanced information technology have become very much a part of our lives and an integral component of contemporary governance. Dependency on computers, computer networks, electronic equipment which resemble and contain components of computers, the internet, intranets are very important integral parts of government, those in the private sector, and of our day-to-day lives. While generally the use of advanced information technology is for human civilization's own good, this same technology can be abused to harm individual human beings, communities, organizations, corporates, and sovereign governments. Terrorist organizations use advanced means of applied technology, including in particular computer technology and the internet, to achieve their goals. As a lawyer, I find myself bent on commencing a discourse on any theme by identifying the definition of the governing theme I have been invited to speak on, and that being cyber terrorism. Thus, I drew my attention to the possible definition of cyber terrorism from a global perspective. Developing and pronouncing a universally acceptable definition to this term is indeed difficult. That is because embedded in this term cyber terrorism is the word terrorism, which is yet to be defined and internationally accepted. Therefore, apart from relying on certain international conventions which define and criminalize certain forms of terrorism, such as hijacking of aircrafts and bombing of civilians, and domestic legislation of certain countries which contain their own definitions of terrorism, we remain stranded with regards to an internationally accepted definition of what terrorism is. Be that as it may, insofar as the term cyber is concerned, there are well accepted scientific and linguistic definitions to the term. The US based National Conference of State Legislatures have coined a definition for the term cyber terrorism, which is, I quote, the use of information technology by terrorist groups and individuals to further their illegal agenda. This can include the use of information technology to organize and execute attacks against networks, computer systems, and telecommunication infrastructures, unquote. It would thus be seen that cyber terrorism means the use of the cyber environment and equipment through which the cyber environment has been created and could be accepted as a means of perpetrating terrorism. Similarly, computers and other equipment through which inter and intranets could be accessed and data could be stored, processed, and disseminated, and computer software through which illegal access to computer systems could be gained and legitimate access to networks could be denied, could be referred to as cyber weapons. Ordinary persons who are not terrorists but criminals do also use computer systems and the internet to achieve their own personal criminal goals. An example for such a criminal act would be using certain computer software and hacking into the intranet of a commercial bank, and through that gaining illegal access to a bank account and thereafter siphoning funds out of that account. Such illegal conduct, ladies and gentlemen, is not referred to as cyber terrorism, but is known as cybercrime. Since terrorism is also a crime, it can be said that cyber terrorism is included in the term cybercrime. Indeed, most of our countries do have legal regimes which criminalize the committing of cybercrime. These legal regimes also provide legislative infrastructure for the investigation, prosecution, and punishment of those who have committed cybercrimes. There are also agencies of sovereign states which are empowered to enforce these laws relating to cybercrimes. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, to get a clear idea of the multiple manifestations and implications of cyber terrorism, we need to focus our attention on a few actual and reported incidents of cyber terrorism during the last few years. My first example. In 1998, at a time when electronic mail, which we commonly refer to as email, was a new means of communication, the presently defunct Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, the LTTE, and a group of its supporters calling themselves the Internet Black Tigers bombarded computers which had email facilities at Sri Lanka's High Commission in the United Kingdom. This caused the computer storage facilities to be flooded, and hence functioning of the computers were totally disrupted. Several other Sri Lankan missions overseas also came under similar attacks. It is believed, ladies and gentlemen, that this is the very first instance of cyber terrorism in the entire world, and Sri Lanka was the first such victim of cyber terrorism. My second example. In April of 2007, in the backdrop of serious law and order issues centering around one ethnic group and tensions rising with a neighboring powerful state, internet connectivity in Estonia came to a halt for nearly 3 weeks. This was sequel to coordinated attacks on computer servers of the government and the private sector of Estonia. As a result of this cyber attack on Estonia, infrastructure and services connected to the internet, including mobile telephone communications, online banking, and access to websites of government institutions, malfunctioned. The cyber attack on Estonia caused mayhem and gave rise to international concern about the vulnerability of states and internet-linked computer systems. My third and final example. On the 12th of July 2012, email accounts of nearly 12,000 Indians, including those of high officials of the Ministries of External Affairs, Home Affairs, and the Defense Research and Development Organization of the Government of India, were hacked. It is believed that those who gained illegal access to these email accounts thereby secured a considerable amount of confidential and sensitive information, and thereby the national security of India was seriously compromised. Ladies and gentlemen, the list of such cyber terrorist attacks on governments is too long for me to narrate any further. The incidents of cyber attacks perpetrated on civilians and on corporate entities are enormous. It would thus be seen that the threat of cyber terrorism is real. Terrorists have effectively used and are likely to continue to use computer systems and cyberspace to perpetrate terrorism. Mr. Chairman, an analysis of instances of cyber terrorism perpetrated by terrorists reveal that they find in the use of computer networks and the media of cyberspace several strategic advantages. Firstly, the ability to remain anonymous and protect the identity of perpetrators. This enables attackers to shield themselves from law enforcement. Secondly, the speed, the sheer speed associated with electronic data flows. Thus, the speed at which terrorist attacks could be perpetrated makes the committing of terrorism through the cyberspace efficacious. Thirdly, the ability to remain at a distant location from the crime scene and to execute action remotely. Fourthly, the availability of easy access to computers and the internet media and the associated minimum cost. Unlike difficulties and the high cost associated with the procurement, possession, and the use of conventional military hardware, such as automatic weapons and explosives, execution of cyber attacks is convenient. Fifthly, a very large number of victims can be targeted by unleashing a single act of cyber terrorism. Therefore, a group of terrorists who are highly computer literate, for them, cyber terrorism is likely to be the preferred option. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I place before you in this backdrop the proposal that armed forces of our respective countries should seriously consider developing rapid action task forces within their respective military establishment. I am aware that the Sri Lanka Army has already initiated such a process. They could be empowered to monitor suspected cyber terrorist activities, thwart possible attacks, and purely as a means of preemptive self-defense, engage proactively and deactivate and immobilize possible computer systems that are or may be imminently used to launch cyber terrorist attacks. The activation of such a new mechanism within the armed forces would necessarily require the development of new legislative infrastructure and organizational and managerial systems. In view of the potentiality of cyberspace forming the theater of cyber warfare, even between states, I predict that it may not be too long before the international community having to develop rules of engagement pertaining to cyber warfare between states as well. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, by presenting this paper, my intention was to provoke your thinking so that we could develop legislative and organizational systems within our armed forces and spring into action well before the threat posed by cyber terrorism becomes a mainstream and predominant means of attacking the sovereignty of nations. Our armed forces will then be well prepared to protect our respective countries from cyber terrorism. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your patient hearing.